Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the battleship UES Defiance and watched death approach his home world. The alien fleet filled the darkness of space like a swarm of metal insects, each ship glowing with the cold blue light that meant destruction for everything human. 300 enemy vessels moved toward Earth in perfect formation, while Jake commanded only 6 ships, the last remnants of humanity's once proud space navy. The Zephyrians had been hunting humans for 3 years now. They came from the far edge of the galaxy, tall beings made of living crystal who spoke in musical tones that could shatter glass. They believed humans were nothing more than violent animals who had no right to exist among the civilized races of the universe. One by one, they had destroyed every human colony beyond Earth, burning worlds and killing millions without mercy or hesitation. Commander Lisa Kane moved quickly through the corridors of the orbital station above Earth, coordinating the evacuation of the planet's remaining population. Her voice echoed through the communication systems as she directed the civilian transports toward the outer system, hoping they might find safety in the asteroid belt or beyond. Every minute counted now, and every ship that escaped meant thousands. More humans might survive what was coming. Down on Earth's surface, Captain Ben Torres watched the sky burn as enemy fighters screamed overhead. The spaceport at New Geneva was humanity's last hope for getting people off the planet, and Ben's Marines held the defensive lines around the landing pads where desperate families waited for transport ships. The ground shook under his feet as Zephyrian plasma bolts struck the city's outer districts, turning buildings to glass and ash in seconds. The enemy had always seen humans as inferior because they felt emotions, because they cried and laughed and loved and hated with a passion that the cold Zephyrians could not understand. To them, these feelings made humans weak and unpredictable, unfit to share the galaxy with races that had evolved beyond such primitive responses. They spoke of bringing order to the universe by removing the chaos that humanity represented. Dr. Alex Chen worked frantically in his laboratory deep beneath the Swiss mountains, trying to understand the strange readings his instruments had been detecting for the past week. Something was sending signals from deep inside Earth's core, patterns of energy that seemed almost like a language, but unlike anything in human records. The signals had grown stronger as the alien fleet approached, as if responding to the approaching danger. Jake Morrison had fought the Zephyrians before, at the battles of New Mars and Europa Station. He had seen their tactics, their precision, their complete lack of mercy for human civilians. They attacked with mathematical certainty, calculating the exact amount of force needed to destroy their targets without waste. They never showed anger or hatred, only the cold efficiency of beings who saw killing humans as no different from clearing weeds from a garden. The communication array crackled to life as reports came in from across the solar system. The enemy had split their forces, sending smaller groups to destroy the mining stations on the outer planets, while the main fleet headed straight for Earth. They meant to end the human species completely, to erase every trace of humanity from the universe as if they had never existed at all. Lisa Kane felt her heart racing as she watched the evacuation ships struggling to reach escape velocity under the weight of desperate refugees. Families had been separated in the chaos. Children, crying for parents who might already be dead, old people who refused to leave the only world they had ever known. The Zephyrians would show no mercy to any of them, seeing even human children as future threats to their vision of galactic order. Ben Torres checked his rifle and counted his remaining ammunition as the enemy ground forces began their assault on the spaceport perimeter. His Marines were outnumbered 10-1, but they held their positions because they knew that every minute they bought meant more civilians might escape. The Zephyrian soldiers moved like living statues, their crystal bodies reflecting the light of burning buildings as they advanced with mechanical precision. Deep in his underground laboratory, Alex Chen stared at his screens in amazement as the mysterious signals suddenly intensified. The energy patterns were coming from locations all across Earth, as if something vast and ancient was waking up in response to the crisis above. The signals seemed to pulse in rhythm with human heartbeats, growing stronger wherever people gathered, together in fear and determination. Jake Morrison opened a channel to all remaining human forces as the enemy fleet entered weapons range. His words carried across space to every surviving ship, every ground unit, every civilian transport fleeing toward the outer darkness. He told them that humanity had faced extinction before and survived, that they would not go quietly into the night that the Zephyrians offered. Whatever happened in the next few hours would determine whether the human species had a future among the stars or would become nothing more than a footnote in galactic history. The first enemy shots lit up the darkness between the fleets, and the final battle for humanity's survival began. The first Zephyrian plasma beams cut through space like spears of blue fire, striking the UES Defiance's shields and sending shockwaves through the ship's hull. Jake Morrison gripped the command chair as his battleship shuddered under the enemy assault, watching his tactical display show impossible odds that no human force had ever overcome. The alien fleet moved with perfect coordination, each ship firing in sequence to create an unbreakable wall of destruction. Far below on Earth's surface, the bombardment began as enemy ships broke through the orbital defenses and rained death upon the cities. Elena Rodriguez crouched in the underground bunkers beneath the Rocky Mountains, her fingers flying over computer keyboards as she tried to decode the mysterious signals that grew stronger with each passing moment. Beside her, young engineer Sam Parker worked desperately to keep the power systems running as explosions shook dust from the concrete ceiling above their heads. The signals were everywhere now, coming from deep beneath every continent and ocean floor. Elena's instruments detected massive structures moving far underground, things that had been sleeping for thousands of years and were now stirring to life. The energy patterns matched no known technology, yet somehow they seemed to respond to human brain waves, growing more active wherever people gathered together in defiance of the approaching extinction. Lieutenant Colonel Danny Walsh led his soldiers through the burning streets of London as Zephyrian fighters screamed overhead, their weapons turning ancient buildings into rivers of molten stone. The Thames had begun to boil where enemy fire struck the water, sending clouds of steam rising into the smoke-filled sky. Danny's men took cover in the underground tunnels, preparing for the alien ground forces that would soon begin landing in the heart of the city. Then, something impossible happened that changed everything Danny thought he knew about his home world. The Thames exploded upward in a fountain of superheated water and steam, and from the depths rose a tower of black crystal that stretched toward the clouds. The structure was perfectly smooth and covered in patterns of light that pulsed like a heartbeat, sending waves of energy through the air that made every human within miles feel suddenly stronger and more determined than before. Similar towers were erupting from the earth all across the planet. In the Amazon rainforest, ancient trees split apart as crystalline spires pierced through centuries of growth. The Sahara Desert cracked open to reveal structures that had waited beneath the sand since before human civilization began. Beneath Tokyo Bay, the ocean floor split and towers rose like fingers reaching toward the sky, their surfaces reflecting the light of burning cities. Sam Parker stared at his instruments in amazement as the underground facility's power levels suddenly doubled, then tripled, then climbed beyond anything the human generators could produce. The energy was coming from outside, flowing into their systems from the awakening towers that now dotted the Earth's surface. Every human-built machine was running better than it ever had before, as if the ancient structures were somehow enhancing their technology. Jake Morrison watched his ship's weapon systems come alive with new power as the mysterious energy reached even into space. The Defiance's plasma cannons charged faster than their specifications allowed, and the targeting computers began tracking enemy movements with impossible accuracy. Around him, the bridge crew worked with renewed purpose, their movements more coordinated, and their responses faster than human reflexes should have permitted. The Zephyrian fleet faltered for the first time in their 3-year campaign against humanity. Their perfect formations wavered as human weapons struck with unexpected force, punching through alien shields that should have been impenetrable. The crystalline beings aboard their ships sang out in confusion and alarm, their harmonic voices creating discordant notes as they tried to understand what was happening to their carefully planned assault. Elena Rodriguez discovered that the towers were not just sources of energy but communication devices that connected every human mind across the planet. She could feel the presence of people she had never met, their thoughts and emotions flowing through the crystalline network like electricity through copper wire. Fear was there, and pain from the bombardment above, but also something stronger that grew with each passing moment as humans everywhere refused to surrender. Danny Walsh felt it too, as he led his soldiers against the first Zephyrian landing parties in the streets of London. The enemy troops moved like living statues, their crystal bodies impervious to most human weapons, but now the British soldiers found their rifles firing with devastating accuracy. Every shot found its target, and the alien invaders began to fall back toward their landing craft as human determination turned into something more powerful than any weapon. The towers sang with a sound too low for human ears to hear, but too powerful for human hearts to ignore. Children hiding in basements felt brave enough to help their parents tend to the wounded. Soldiers surrounded by overwhelming enemy forces found the strength to make one more charge. Scientists working to solve impossible problems discovered answers that had eluded them for years. Ben Torres held the spaceport at New Geneva as Zephyrian ground forces pressed their attack against his defensive lines. His Marines had been pushed back to the final perimeter around the landing pads where civilian transport still waited to evacuate refugees. The enemy seemed infinite in number, wave after wave of crystal soldiers advancing with mechanical precision. But something had changed in the way his weapons worked and the way his men fought. Lisa Kane coordinated the evacuation from orbit as more and more transport ships escaped Earth's gravity well, carrying human survivors toward uncertain safety in the outer system. The orbital defense platforms were holding longer than anyone had dared hope, their weapons enhanced by the same mysterious energy that flowed from the awakening towers. For the first time since the Zephyrian fleet had appeared, she began to believe that some of humanity might actually survive. Alex Chen emerged from his laboratory to see the tower that had risen from the mountains nearby, its crystal surface reflecting the light of burning cities, while patterns of energy danced across its faceted walls. The structure hummed with power that seemed to resonate in his bones, and when he placed his hand against its surface, he felt connected to every other human on Earth and beyond. Something ancient had awakened to defend them, something that recognized the value of human emotion and determination in a universe that had grown cold and logical. Elena Rodriguez felt the revelation flow through her mind like lightning as she touched the crystal surface of the nearest tower. The ancient structures were not just responding to human emotions, but were designed specifically for beings like humanity. Creatures who felt fear and hope and love with an intensity that most galactic civilizations had abandoned eons ago. The builders of these towers had been waiting for someone exactly like humans to inherit their legacy. The beings who created the towers called themselves the architects, and their story unfolded in Elena's consciousness like a movie playing at impossible speed. They had been young once, passionate and determined, spreading across their galaxy with the same fierce joy that humans felt when exploring new worlds. But older races had viewed them as dangerous, too emotional and unpredictable to be allowed to continue existing among the ordered civilizations of the universe. Captain Helen Brooks commanded the orbital defense platform Vigilant as it unleashed devastating fire upon the Zephyrian fleet, her weapons now enhanced by the mysterious energy flowing from Earth's surface. The alien ships that had seemed invincible just hours before were taking damage, their shields failing under the assault of human weapons that fought with passion instead of cold calculation. Helen could feel the determination of every human, soldier and civilian, connected through the tower network, their combined will to survive making her platform's guns fire with impossible accuracy. On the ground, Marine Sergeant Roy Campbell watched in amazement as Zephyrian soldiers stumbled and fell when they came too close to the newly risen towers. The crystalline aliens seemed to become confused and disoriented near the ancient structures, their perfect coordination breaking down as the harmonic frequencies they used for communication were disrupted by the energy fields radiating from the architect devices. The architects had faced extinction just as humanity did now, surrounded by enemies who saw their emotional nature as a flaw that needed to be corrected or eliminated. But instead of surrendering or trying to become like their attackers, they had chosen a different path. In their final days, they had poured their essence into these towers and seeded them across hundreds of worlds, waiting for another species, with the right combination of stubborn determination and emotional depth to awaken their defenses. Jake Morrison felt the presence of the long-dead architects in his mind as the UES Defiance traded fire with 3 Zephyrian cruisers at once. The ancient beings spoke to him without words, showing him visions of their last battle and their final message to whoever would inherit their technology. They had refused to let the universe become a cold and emotionless place, and now they lived on through humanity's determination to survive against impossible odds. The architect message was simple but profound. Not all who fought with honor would survive the battles ahead, but those who refused to surrender would inherit the stars and carry the flame of emotion and creativity to worlds that had forgotten what it meant to truly live. The towers were more than weapons or shields. They were beacons calling out to any species brave enough to feel deeply and fight for what they loved. Elena Rodriguez understood now why the towers responded so strongly to human determination. The architects had built them to recognize the specific neural patterns of beings who could experience hope in the face of despair, who could find strength in their connections to others, and who would rather die fighting than live as slaves to cold logic. Humans were not just accidentally compatible with architect technology, they were its intended inheritors. Danny Walsh led his soldiers through the streets of London as the ancient tower rose higher into the sky above the Thames, its crystalline surface now extending beyond the clouds and into the upper atmosphere. The Zephyrian ground forces that had been advancing with mechanical precision were now retreating in confusion, their formations broken by the tower's disruptive fields and the sudden ferocity of human resistance. The energy flowing through the tower network was not just enhancing human technology, but connecting human minds across the planet in ways that made every person stronger. A wounded soldier in New York could draw strength from a child's courage in Tokyo. A scientist in Australia could access the combined knowledge of researchers around the world. Fear and pain were still present, but they were balanced by hope and determination shared across the entire species. Sam Parker monitored the power levels in the underground facility as they climbed beyond anything human science had thought possible. The towers were tapping into energy sources that existed between dimensions, drawing power from the collective emotional resonance of every human who refused to give up hope. The more determined people became, the stronger the ancient defenses grew, creating a feedback loop that turned human stubbornness into a weapon capable of challenging the most advanced alien technology. Ben Torres felt the change in his soldiers as they made their final stand at the New Geneva spaceport. His Marines had been pushed back to the last defensive line around the landing pads, but now they fought with a coordination and effectiveness that surpassed their training. Each man and woman was connected to the others through the tower network, their individual skills and courage amplified by the shared determination of the entire unit. The Zephyrians had conquered dozens of worlds by convincing other species that emotion was weakness, that the logical thing to do when faced with superior force was to surrender and accept extinction with dignity. But humans were different, shaped by millions of years of evolution on a dangerous world that had taught them to fight against impossible odds and find hope in the darkest situations. Captain Helen Brooks watched the tide of battle begin to turn, as human ships across the solar system reported similar enhancements to their weapons and defenses. The towers were not just on Earth, but had been sleeping beneath the surfaces of Mars and Europa, even in the asteroid belt, where human mining. Stations had unknowingly built their facilities above ancient architect sites. Humanity's expansion into space had been guided by instincts they did not understand, leading them to the very places where their inheritance waited. Lisa Kane coordinated with the evacuation fleet as more towers awakened throughout the system, creating a network of safe zones where human technology worked with incredible efficiency while alien systems failed and malfunctioned. The Zephyrian fleet that had seemed unstoppable was now fighting a defensive battle against an enemy they did not understand, facing weapons powered by the one thing their cold logic could not calculate or counter. Alex Chen placed both hands against the tower's surface and felt the full weight of the architect legacy flowing into his consciousness. They had not just left behind technology but wisdom, the understanding that life without passion was not worth preserving and that some things were worth fighting for no matter what the odds. Humanity would either triumph as themselves or die as themselves, but they would never become the emotionless shells that their enemies wanted them to be. Pilot Rachel Stone felt her fighter respond to her thoughts as much as her hands on the controls, the small craft dancing between Zephyrian plasma beams with impossible grace. Her ship had launched from the carrier UES Triumph just as the Ancient. Towers reached full power, and now the fighter moved like an extension of her will rather than a machine following programmed responses. Every time she thought about protecting Earth, her weapons fired with devastating accuracy that turned enemy bombers into clouds of glowing debris. The transformation of human technology was spreading across the battlefield like wildfire. General Nathan Clark coordinated ground forces from his command bunker as reports flooded in from every front. His soldiers were pushing back Zephyrian landing parties that had seemed unstoppable just hours before, their enhanced weapons cutting through alien armor, while the tower networks provided perfect communication and tactical coordination between units separated by thousands of miles. The towers had created energy shields around major population centers, translucent barriers that turned Zephyrian plasma fire into harmless light shows while allowing human weapons to pass through unimpeded. Dr. Carlos Martinez studied captured alien technology in his laboratory and discovered why the architect defenses were so effective against the Zephyrian fleet. The enemy had grown dependent on logical, predictable responses from their opponents, but human emotions created chaos patterns that their tactical computers could not analyze or counter. Commander Lisa Kane watched from the orbital station as civilian evacuation ships that had been struggling to escape Earth's gravity suddenly accelerated beyond their design specifications. The architect energy was enhancing every human-built system, turning cargo haulers into vessels capable of outrunning Zephyrian interceptors. Families that had been separated in the chaos of evacuation were now reconnecting through the tower network, parents and children finding each other across vast distances through shared emotional bonds. The network was growing stronger as more humans connected to it, their individual determination combining into something greater than the sum of its parts. 12-year-old Amy Foster huddled with her family in a shelter beneath Chicago, but instead of crying in fear, she found herself somehow contributing to the defense of her world. Her young mind added its own thread to the tapestry of human will that powered the ancient systems, her simple desire for her family to be safe, joining with millions of similar hopes to create an unstoppable force. Jake Morrison felt the change in his ship as the UES Defiance engaged a Zephyrian dreadnought, 3 times its size. The enemy vessel had weapons that should have destroyed his battleship in seconds, but the architect-enhanced shields held while human plasma cannons punched through alien armor with surgical precision. His crew worked with perfect synchronization, each person anticipating the needs of others as if they shared a single mind focused on victory. The Zephyrians were experiencing something they had never encountered in their centuries of conquest. Other species had fought with desperate courage when facing extinction, but they had always fought alone, each individual or small group struggling against overwhelming odds without connection or coordination. Humans were different. They're emotional. Bonds creating a collective consciousness that made every person stronger while maintaining their individual identity and will. Rachel Stone dove her fighter through a formation of enemy bombers, her weapons cycling faster than their specifications allowed as she felt the shared determination of every human in the battle flowing through the tower network. She was not just one pilot against impossible odds, but part of a vast organism of human will that refused to accept defeat. Her thoughts touched those of soldiers on the ground and sailors in space, drawing strength from their courage while adding her own to the collective effort. Ben Torres led his Marines in a counterattack against Zephyrian positions around the New Geneva spaceport, their enhanced weapons cutting through enemy fortifications like paper. The alien soldiers who had advanced with mechanical precision were now falling back in confusion as human forces coordinated their assault through the tower network. Every Marine knew exactly where his comrades were and what they needed, creating tactical advantages that no amount of alien technology could overcome. Dr. Martinez made a crucial discovery as he analyzed the way architect technology interfaced with human neural patterns. The ancient beings had not just built weapons and defenses, but had created a system that amplified the uniquely human ability to find hope in desperate situations. Other species that faced extinction typically became paralyzed by fear or accepted their fate with resigned logic, but humans grew more determined and creative when cornered. The Zephyrian fleet commanders sang out in harmonic confusion as their perfect battle plans crumbled against human unpredictability. They had calculated the exact amount of force needed to destroy Earth's defenses, but their equations had not accounted for an enemy that became stronger under pressure. Human ships that should have been destroyed were still fighting, their crews finding ways to repair damage that should have been fatal, while weapons that should have been exhausted continued to fire. Elena Rodriguez discovered another layer too, the architect legacy as she delved deeper into the tower network. The ancient beings had faced the same choice that humanity faced now, to surrender and accept peaceful extinction, or to fight for the right to remain themselves. They had chosen to fight and had built these towers not just as weapons, but as a declaration that some things were worth dying for, and that life without passion was not life at all. General Clark received reports from around the globe as human. Forces began liberating territory that had been overrun in the first hours of the invasion. The towers were not just defensive systems, but beacons that called to the human spirit, reminding every person that they were part of something larger and more important than their individual survival. Children found the courage to help wounded. Adults, civilians picked up weapons to defend their homes, and soldiers discovered reserves of strength they had never known they possessed. Lisa Kane coordinated with the evacuation fleet as enhanced human ships began escorting refugees to safety in the outer system. The Zephyrian blockade that had seemed unbreakable was now full of holes as human vessels moved with impossible speed and agility. Families torn apart by the invasion were reuniting on distant stations, their emotional connections somehow enhanced by the tower network that linked every human mind across space and time. Amy Foster placed her small hand against the wall of the shelter and felt the presence of the ancient tower buried deep beneath Chicago. The architect consciousness touched hers gently, showing her visions of beings who had once been young and curious like herself, who had refused to let the universe become a cold and empty place. Through her connection, the tower drew strength. From her simple faith that tomorrow would be better than today, her childhood optimism becoming part of the weapon that defended her world. The war spread across the galaxy as signals from Earth's awakening towers reached human colonies that everyone had believed were lost forever. Lieutenant Colonel Maria Santos felt the ancient technology surge to life beneath New Titan's surface, just as Zephyrian occupation forces prepared to execute the last surviving colonists. The towers that erupted from the moon's ice fields caught the aliens completely by surprise, their harmonic communication networks disrupted by energy fields that responded to human determination rather than logical calculation. Commander Jack Williams broke the siege of Alpha Centauri as similar towers awakened throughout the star system, turning what had been a hopeless last stand into a coordinated counterattack that drove the Zephyrian fleet back toward deep space. Human ships that had been hiding in asteroid fields and gas giant atmospheres suddenly emerged with weapons enhanced beyond their original specifications, their crews connected through the Architect network that spanned light years instantaneously. But the Zephyrians were not a species that accepted defeat easily, and their response to humanity's unexpected resurgence was swift and terrible. From the deep core of their empire came ships unlike any they had used before, vessels that sang with harmonies that could drive most species insane, and weapons that attacked the mind rather than the body. At the center of their fleet was something that human sensors could barely detect, a device that the aliens called the silence generator. Elena Rodriguez felt the change in the tower network as the Zephyrian superweapon approached Earth's solar system. The connections between human minds that had grown stronger with each passing hour were beginning to weaken, the emotional bonds that powered the Architect technology starting to fade, like music being turned down slowly but steadily. The ancient towers still functioned, but they responded less readily to human will, their energy fields fluctuating as if struggling against some invisible force. Dr. Martinez analyzed the readings from his instruments and realized what the Zephyrians were attempting. The silence generator was designed to suppress all emotional and creative thought within a vast radius, forcing affected minds to think in purely logical patterns that could not activate Architect technology. It was the ultimate weapon against species like humanity, designed to make them think like Zephyrians and thus render their greatest strength useless. Jake Morrison felt his connection to the tower network growing weaker as the enemy superweapon came within range of Earth. His crew still followed orders with military precision, but the spark of inspiration and determination that had made them unbeatable was slowly draining away. The UES Defiance's enhanced weapons were returning to their original specifications, and the Zephyrian fleet was advancing once more with their characteristic mechanical confidence. The effect spread outward from the silence generator like a wave of cold water, washing over human positions throughout the solar system and beyond. Rachel Stone found her fighter responding sluggishly to her commands as the emotional connection that had made her ship an extension of her will began to fade. General Clark's ground forces were still fighting effectively, but they were losing the supernatural coordination that had allowed them to outmaneuver vastly superior enemy numbers. Amy Foster felt the change even in her shelter beneath Chicago, the warm presence of the Architect consciousness growing distant and cold as the silence generator's influence reached deep into Earth's crust. The tower network was still operational, but it was becoming just another piece of advanced technology, rather than the living extension of human will that had turned the tide of battle. The child's simple faith in a better tomorrow was being replaced by adult calculations of odds and probabilities. Maria Santos watched her colonists on New Titan begin to lose hope as the ancient defenses weakened around them. The Zephyrian occupation force that had been retreating in confusion was now regrouping, their tactical computers once again able to predict and counter human responses. The towers still provided some protection, but they were no longer the invincible shields powered by collective human determination. Ben Torres felt his Marines beginning to fight like ordinary soldiers rather than the unstoppable force they had become when connected through the tower network. Their weapons were still enhanced by architect technology, but they no longer fired with the passionate accuracy that had made every shot count. The Zephyrian ground forces were advancing once more, their crystalline forms reflecting the light of burning buildings as they moved with renewed confidence. Commander Williams at Alpha Centauri reported similar effects throughout his fleet as the silence generator's influence spread across interstellar distances at faster-than-light speeds. Human ships were still more effective than they had been before the towers awakened, but they were losing the emotional coordination that had allowed small squadrons to defeat entire enemy fleets. The Zephyrians were pressing their advantage, bringing up reinforcements that had been held in reserve for exactly this situation. Elena Rodriguez worked desperately in her underground laboratory to find some way to counter the alien superweapon, but the silence generator was affecting her ability to think creatively about the problem. She could analyze its effects logically and understand how it worked, but the intuitive leaps and emotional insights that had led to her greatest discoveries were becoming harder and harder to achieve. Lisa Kane coordinated the defense of Earth's orbital stations as the Zephyrian fleet closed in once more, but she could feel the despair beginning to creep into her thoughts, despite all her training and experience. The evacuation ships that had been moving with impossible speed were now struggling to maintain basic formation as their crews lost the emotional bonds that had enhanced their coordination. Families that had been reunited through the tower network were losing contact with each other as the connections weakened. Helen Brooks felt the change aboard her defense platform as her crew began operating like an efficient but uninspired military unit rather than the passionate defenders they had become under the influence of architect technology. Her weapons were still enhanced beyond human specifications, but they no longer fired with the righteous fury that had made them so effective against alien shields and armor. Dr. Martinez made one final discovery as the silence generator's effects reached their peak intensity. The Zephyrian weapon was not just suppressing human emotions, but was replacing them with the cold logic that characterized every species the aliens had conquered. It was designed to make humans think exactly like their enemies, turning humanity's greatest strength into the weakness that the Zephyrians understood and could easily counter. Jake Morrison opened communication channels to all remaining human forces as his fleet prepared for what might be their final battle. The enhanced coordination was gone, the supernatural accuracy was fading, and the determination that had seemed unbreakable was being slowly crushed beneath the weight of logical analysis that showed just how hopeless their situation really was. The Zephyrians were advancing with renewed confidence, their formations perfect once more as they prepared to complete the extinction they had begun 3 years before. The silence generator reached full power as the Zephyrian fleet closed in for the final assault on Earth, its harmonics washing over human positions like a tide of cold logic that should have broken the last resistance. But in the deepest bunkers and the most desperate situations, something the aliens had not calculated began to happen. The bonds between humans that had formed over millions of years of evolution proved stronger than any artificial suppression of emotion. Amy Foster reached through the numbing effects of the enemy weapon to find her mother's hand in the darkness of their shelter. That simple touch carried more power than all the alien technology in the galaxy, a connection forged by love that no amount of logic could break. Through her small fingers flowed the determination of a child who refused to believe that bad things could win forever. And the ancient tower beneath Chicago responded to that faith with a surge of energy that pierced the silence generator's influence. Ben Torres felt his wife's face in his memory even as the alien weapon tried to reduce him to pure tactical thinking. She had died in the first wave of attacks 3 years ago, but her love for him and their children remained as real as his rifle and as powerful as any weapon the architects had ever built. That memory connected him to every other human who had lost someone dear, and their shared grief became a force that the Zephyrian superweapon could not comprehend or counter. Elena Rodriguez found her breakthrough not through logical analysis, but through a mother's desperate need to protect her children, who were trapped on the other side of the planet. The tower network responded to that parental instinct with a pulse of energy that overloaded the silence generator's local nodes, creating gaps in its influence that other humans could exploit. Love was proving stronger than logic, emotion more durable than any artificial suppression. Maria Santos on New Titan felt the presence of her grandfather, who had taught her to never give up when she was a child. He had been dead for 20 years, but his voice echoed in her memory with words about courage and determination that no alien weapon could silence. The colonists around her began to remember their own loved ones, living and dead, and those memories created an emotional resonance that the ancient towers recognized and amplified. Jake Morrison thought about his daughter on one of the evacuation ships, probably scared and confused, but still believing that her father would find a way to protect her. That faith gave him strength that transcended any tactical analysis, and his connection to her spread through the tower network to touch every other parent in the human fleet. The UES Defiance's weapons began firing with renewed accuracy as the bonds of family proved more powerful than Zephyrian technology. The silence generator was designed to suppress individual emotions, but it had no defense against the connections between human hearts that spanned generations and light years. Rachel Stone felt her fighter responding to her will once more as she remembered every person she had ever cared about, their faces forming a constellation of love that guided her weapons toward enemy targets. Her ship danced between Zephyrian plasma beams with grace born of determination to see her friends and family again. General Clark coordinated his forces through a network of shared memories and hopes that the alien superweapon could not touch. His soldiers remembered their homes and families, their dreams of peace, and their refusal to let evil triumph without a fight. Those memories connected them more surely than any radio communication, creating tactical coordination based on understanding rather than mere efficiency. Ben Torres led his Marines in one final charge against the Zephyrian command center, carrying with him not just his duty as a soldier, but the faces of every human child he had ever sworn to protect. The emotional resonance of that commitment overloaded the silence generator's local field, causing a cascade failure that spread through the alien fleet like lightning jumping between conductors. The Zephyrian ships began losing coordination as their harmonic communication networks were disrupted by the feedback from their own superweapon. For the first time in their species' history, they experienced something like panic as their perfect logical systems were overwhelmed by the chaotic but unstoppable force of human emotional bonds. Their crystalline bodies resonated with frequencies they could not control, and their fleet formations began to break apart. Amy Foster felt the ancient towers reaching full power once more as the silence generator's influence collapsed under the weight of human love and determination. The architect consciousness spoke to her with warmth that had been missing for hours, showing her visions of beings who had once faced the same choice that humanity faced now. They had chosen to preserve emotion and creativity rather than surrender to cold logic, and that choice had echoed through the ages to reach this moment. Elena Rodriguez discovered the final message from the architects as the tower network restored its full power. They had not just built weapons and defenses, but had created a declaration that some things were worth fighting for regardless of the odds. They had refused to die as a species, and through humanity, they lived on in every act of love and defiance that proved the universe could be more than a cold mechanical process. Admiral Morrison offered the surviving Zephyrians a choice as human. Ships surrounded their damaged fleet. They could learn to coexist with emotional species and discover what they had lost when they abandoned feeling in favor of pure logic, or they could face the same extinction they had tried to impose on others. Some of the alien ships chose to flee toward the galactic rim, but others remained, their crews curious for the first time in centuries about what it might mean to feel hope and wonder again. Dr. Martinez stood beside one of the ancient towers as Earth began to heal from the devastation of war. The architect technology was not just repairing the damage, but was calling out to other emotional species across the galaxy, sending signals that promised sanctuary and protection for any beings willing to feel deeply and fight for what they loved. Humanity would not be alone in their inheritance of the stars. Lisa Kane watched human ships launching toward distant galaxies as the evacuation became an expansion, carrying not conquest, but the promise that the universe did not have to be a cold and empty place. The refugees who had fled Earth in terror were now returning as explorers and protectors, their enhanced ships carrying the flame of human determination to worlds that had forgotten what it meant to truly live. Captain Ben Torres walked through the rebuilt streets of New Geneva with his surviving Marines, knowing that they had not just saved their species, but had preserved something precious for the entire galaxy. The towers still rose toward the sky, no longer weapons of desperate defense, but beacons of hope that called to every being capable of love and wonder and stubborn refusal to surrender in the face of impossible odds. Amy Foster placed her hand against the tower in Chicago and felt the presence of countless other species across the galaxy who had been waiting for someone to remind them that existence without passion was not worth preserving. Through humanity's refusal to die, the architect's final gift to the universe had been delivered, and the stars themselves seemed brighter with the promise of emotions and dreams that would never be silenced again.